Hello everyone, welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 5th of May 2024. So let's begin with the list of articles first. Now today there is a unique scenario that we do not have any article for detailed analysis. Today the articles that we have are more tilted towards your prelims examination. So let's have a discussion on these articles. So there are 5 articles that we are going to discuss from prelims perspective, and then there is one article that we have as a revisited headline today. So these are the articles that we are going to discuss. So let's begin with our first article, and this is on page number 1 related to economy. Center lifts export ban on onion, but conditions apply. Now what conditions? So what we have seen is that the government of India has lifted the ban on the onion exports, which was implemented nearly 6 months ago. But this is something which has been done with some restrictions. Now, when it comes to this, what we see is that the minimum export price is supposed to be $550 per ton and a 40% export duty above it. Now, these are the two criteria that have been put. Now, this decision basically comes with the concerns over some food inflation and the supply issues, particularly in the context of the upcoming Lok Sabha elections as well, in the onion producing regions like Gujarat and Maharashtra. Now, earlier there was a criticism regarding a very limited allowance of white onion exports from Gujarat and neglecting Maharashtra's red onion farmers. And that's why this is a move that aims to address these kind of grievances, and that's why trying to ensure a fair distribution of export opportunities among all the onion producing states. Now when we look at the global onion prices, the global onion prices have actually surged due to the export ban by major suppliers like India, Pakistan, Egypt, etc. But recently what we have seen is that Egypt has lifted the export restrictions and Pakistan also followed the suit. So that is something that has contributed to a more stable global onion prices. So that's why this decision to lift the onion price was made after assessing the onion market situation, and with the Consumer Affairs Ministry also emphasizing that there is a need to balance the domestic consumption and the exports. So that's why the imposition of a 40% duty on top of the minimum export price also means that the Indian onion exports will be viable if the global buyers are willing to pay at least $770 per ton. So that's why this export ban initially it was enforced to make sure that the domestic onion supply, especially during the period of decreased production, could be taken care of. But with the upcoming Rabi crop, which is expected to be good, and there is a favorable monsoon which also has been forecast this year for the Kharif season of 2024-25, the government believes that the global onion prices or the supplies will remain adequate for India. So that's why we see that there are all these things with regard to the new development that we see with onion prices. Now just one more thing that you should understand from this perspective, that whenever there is an export ban, why would exports be banned? So if we are talking about any kind of export bans, why exactly would a government ban exports? So first, there are 3-4 particular reasons that you should know. So first could be about domestic supply concerns, that if there is a shortage of a particular commodity in domestic market, the government may restrict the export to ensure that there is sufficient availability within the country. So that's why one can be domestic supply concerns. Domestic supply concerns. This could be one of the reasons. Then apart from that, sometimes to ensure price stability also it will be done, that export restrictions may be imposed to control the domestic prices by limiting the total outflow of the goods. And this is particularly relevant for essential commodities like onion, which are very sensitive to price fluctuations and impact consumers directly. So that's why sometimes for price stabilization also, to maintain price stability also, this would be done. So this is the second reason. Then the third reason, sometimes it is also dictated by global market dynamics, because export restrictions can also be influenced by global market conditions also. If there's, let's say, an instability or volatility in the international market, the government may impose restrictions to safeguard the domestic interests. So that's why sometimes we see that the global market dynamics also would lead to these kind of exchanges, or let's say the export bans. Now sometimes the governments may also restrict the exports to build up a strategic reserve, or let's say buffer stock of essential commodities for some of the future contingencies as well. So that's why this is also sometimes it is done, that we try to maintain buffer stock. We might want to maintain buffer stock, and to maintain buffer stock also sometimes the government might do that. So that's why just remember some of these kind of areas why exactly would export bans would happen. Now coming to the next article, this is duck farming stares at death amid outbreaks of avian flu. Now from the perspective of this article, what we basically are seeing is that there have been certain cases of bird flu, which there have been recurring cases rather of bird flu outbreaks in some of the areas, and especially in Kuttanad in Kerala. Now they have significantly impacted duck farming, something which is a very vital source of income for many of the families in this particular region. And the most recent outbreak of the avian influenza, which is H5N1, this has led to the death or culling of over 65,000 birds. Over 65,000 birds in primarily in 6 hotspots in Alappuzha and Kottayam districts. So that's why we see that this basically is in Kottayam. Just remember that one, we are talking about Kottayam, and at the same time in Alappuzha district as well. So that's why these two districts largely also we have seen this, and the frequency of avian flu outbreaks in when it comes to Kuttanad, we see that almost there have been 6 reported cases in the past decade, and this has led to the decline in the number of large-scale duck farmers from almost thousands to now hundreds. And many farmers, both large and small scale farmers, they are contemplating leaving the business altogether. And that's why this is also raising concern about the sustainability of the traditional duck farming practices in the region as well. Now, unlike poultry farming, which very often involves indoor rearing, in case of duck farming, especially in these kind of districts, you'll see that typically it occurs in the open environments. And that's why it is also frequently visited by migratory birds, and that's why there is an increased risk of avian influenza transmission in these areas. So that's why there are these kind of problems that we have. So overall, so just remember that when it comes to these areas, because when it comes to duck farming, in case of duck farming, we see that we typically it is done in the open environments, right? It is basically, we are saying that it is more of outdoor rearing, correct? So that's why it means that they come in contact with migratory birds, contact with migratory birds, and this leads to increased risk of avian influenza. All right, so just remember this. Now, uh, when it comes to avian influenza, I'll just give you some details with regard to avian influenza. Now, this is something when it comes to avian influenza or bird flu as we call it normally, a virus usually does not infect people. All right, avian influenza viruses, they do not infect people usually. But what we have seen is that there have been some rare cases of human infection as well with these viruses. Now, illness in humans from avian influenza virus infections have ranged from very severe to also no symptoms or very mild symptoms also. And there have been certain cases although where we have seen that it has led to even death of the people who have been uh, infected with bird flu. Now, when it comes to avian influenza, just remember that there are different types of avian influenza. So first, for example, is H7N9 virus. There is the H7N9 virus. Alright. Now, this basically is highly pathogenic avian influenza, and in this particular scenario, this is the other one, which is you can say the basic avian influenza, but then there is the highly pathogenic avian influenza, which is also called as H5N1, the one that we discussed. So there is H5N1, and then there is also another strain which is called as the H5N6. Now, in case of humans, we have seen that these have been actually the bigger challenges, because when it comes to the highly pathogenic avian influenza, just remember that this HPAI or highly pathogenic avian influenza, this has been mostly the cause for the human cases. In most of the cases, we have seen that they have been the ones which have been causes of the human cases, and we have seen that when it comes to the viruses, they have been responsible for most of these human illnesses from avian influenza viruses, and which is something that has been reported worldwide, and including most serious illnesses with very high mortality as well. Now, in this case, infected birds, they shed avian influenza viruses through their saliva or mucus or feces, and other animals infected with avian influenza viruses may have virus present in their respiratory secretions as well, and maybe different organs or blood or other bodily fluids, for example even animal milk. So human infections with avian influenza viruses can happen when virus gets into a person's eyes, nose, mouth, or is inhaled in one way or the other. So that's why just remember that so in any way, if let's say somebody comes in contact, so that's why eyes or nose or mouth, or in any way if you are inhaling, then in that case this can lead to the infection. Now, this can happen when the virus is in the air, maybe in droplet form, and deposits on the mucous membranes of the eyes, or a person breathes it in, or maybe possibly when a person touches something that is contaminated with the virus, and then it maybe they touch their mouth, eyes, or nose, and that becomes a way in which it can enter the body. And if it enters the body, if there are cases, then we'll see that it might lead to headache, muscular pain, shivering, cough, breathlessness. So there are all these kinds of cases, or all these, you can say, symptoms that there can be. So that's why there are all these cases. Now just remember that one thing that is good in case of the human infections of avian influenza or bird flu is that we do not see human to human transmissions. Transmissions happen from animals or birds. Transmission does not happen from human to human, because if that happens, then in that case it can be a very dangerous scenario. Because for example, we have seen in case of COVID-19 that how quickly a human to human transmission can happen. But in case of bird flu, human to human transmissions do not happen. Transmissions happen from the bird to the human or some other animal to the human. But again, in those cases also, the cases are very rare. It doesn't really happen very often. So that's why it still remains a low risk, but the problem is that the mortality rate in certain cases can be high. So that's why we have to take a lot of measures to ensure that these kind of cases do not develop further. Now, coming to another article, and this is something which is important from prelims perspective. Can the new organelle help engineer plants to fix nitrogen? Now, what exactly are we talking about? New organelle, right? We are talking about a new organelle. Now, here there is a particular theory that we need to know of. So, for example, let's say when we talk about the Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, that proposed that species adapt to their environments over time, and it is something that has been for very long has been a cornerstone of evolutionary biology, correct? So when we talk about the theory of natural selection, which was given by Charles Darwin, what exactly does it say? It says that the species will adapt to their environments, right? It says that species adapt to their environments over time, right? So what happens is that if there are certain changes in your environment, we will start to adapt to it, and there will be changes in our biology that will happen, so that we keep on adapting to all these external external environment, right? So in many of the species we have seen, and you have read about a lot of species where we see that over hundreds of years, thousands of years, these kind of evolutions keep on happening. So there are evolutions so that we can adapt, correct? So that is called as the theory of natural selection, that was given by Charles Darwin. Now there is another theory that was given by Lynn Margulis. Now this is something that had challenged the neo-Darwinist view by introducing something called as symbiogenesis. Now in this case of symbiogenesis, what has been suggested, that organelles like mitochondria or chloroplasts, they were once a free living bacteria, and they became integrated into the eukaryotic cell through something called as endosymbiosis. Just understand this. What exactly are we saying? That it suggests that organelles like mitochondria and chloroplasts were once free living bacteria, and then they got integrated into the eukaryotic cell. Now eukaryotic cell, basically you can say, are the more complex cells, like for example the human cells or all the higher plants and animals. These are called as eukaryotic cells. So where you have a very well defined nucleus, where you have a very well defined membrane and everything. But in case of the other kind of cells, which are called as prokaryotic cells, these are the cells where you do not have a very well defined nucleus. So that's the basic difference. So all the complex animals and plants, they are basically eukaryotic in nature. Now what basically this endosymbiotic theory says is that some of these organelles like mitochondria, what do we very famously call mitochondria as? I'm very sure that all of you know. So in case of mitochondria, we know what this theory says is that it might have been a free living bacteria, and then it got integrated. It got integrated into eukaryotic cells through the process of endosymbiosis. Now this theory, which was given by Margulis, this faced very significant opposition as well, and her manuscript, for example, was rejected numerous times before finally it was published back in 1967. And despite initial resistance, the idea, it started gaining some acceptance over time. Now there are some recent studies, and these recent studies, which were published in some of the very important journals like Science and Cell, they have reignited the interest in the endosymbiotic theory. And these studies, they focused on nitrogen fixation, something which is a very crucial process in which the bacteria, they would convert the atmospheric nitrogen into the usable form of nitrogen for the plants, into nitrates, correct? So basically the discovery of nitrogen fixing cyanobacteria in the marine algae. This is something that they were studying. And this has led to the identification of a new organelle, and they have named the new organelle as nitroplast. Nitroplast. So nitroplast basically, is something that may have co-evolved with its host cell. So identified as a new organelle with co-evolved with its new cell. Now the researchers, they have demonstrated that nitroplast meets the criteria of a bona fide organelle, and including integration into the host cell's function, architecture, protein import from the host cell, synchronization with the host cell growth, then inheritance that happens during cell division. So all these conditions typically which are required for something to be called as an organelle are being met. Now, while the nitroplasts, they hold very important promise for revolutionizing the agriculture by maybe reducing the need for industrial ammonia production, this is something that may lead to a lot of new developments. But yes, there are significant challenges that we have here. So just remember that why are we calling it as an organelle? Because the integration, protein import, growth synchronization, inheritance criteria that happens during cell division, all these criteria are being met. All these criteria, they are being met, and that's why it is being called as an organelle. So maybe it will have agricultural implications for us. So overall, just remember that we are talking about two things. One, the endosymbiotic theory, and second, the new organelle called as the nitroplast. So this figure that you see right here, this is the image that was released, and this is what we are calling as a nitroplast. This is what we are calling as a nitroplast. So this looks blurry because this is the image that was published under the microscope. This is the image that they have gotten. So endosymbiotic theory, again, just to reiterate, it is something that proposes that organelles such as mitochondria and chloroplast found within the eukaryotic cells, they originated from free living bacteria that were engulfed by some of the ancestral eukaryotic cells in a symbiotic relationship. And over time, these bacteria, they became integrated into the host cell, and that's why they developed a mutually beneficial relationship. So this is basically what might have happened. So if you look at the first figure that we have right here, this is something that might have happened, that the ancestral prokaryotic cell, all right, this basically might have gotten integrated with the cell, all right, a eukaryotic cell, and started living in a symbiotic relationship. And ultimately we might see that evolution of the cell might evolution of cells might happen, and hence these kind of cells, like for example the chloroplast or the mitochondria, they might have gotten integrated into the cell, having a symbiotic relationship. So this is basically what is has been proposed as a part of the endosymbiotic theory. All right. So this is exactly what has happened. And symbiotic relation, meaning what? That they have a mutually beneficial relationship. That what does mitochondria do? It provides energy to the cell. So it helps in providing energy to the cell, and in return it is getting everything that it should have to survive. So that's why this theory suggests that the ancestors of the eukaryotic cells, they formed symbiotic association with the prokaryotic cell, and that's why leading to the development of a very complex cellular structure. So just remember these two things about endosymbiotic theory and nitroplast. Now, another news with regard to H5N1 outbreak, the route of transmission is unclear. Now what we basically saw, and this is where we are going a little beyond India also, that in March there was a mysterious disease that was detected in Texas, and later on it was confirmed that it was avian influenza H5N1. Now it is something that quickly had spread to more than 36 herds across 9 US states, and this kind of rapid spread spread that happened. We see that a lot of testing, etc. happened, and this is where we see that there are global concerns being raised with regard to avian influenza. Now, we see that there are different kinds of lineages that have been also reported since 2022, and it has reached almost every continent, just not Australia yet. And it is something which is severely impacting numerous different bird species and a kind of spillage that has happened over hundreds of mammal species as well. And in the US, the outbreak has also affected farm cats also. Cats have been affected, and there have been 7 cases confirmed among even cats. So there is a reported case of mild, there has been reported cases of mild human infections as well, which has been led to contact with these animals, or although when we look at the overall risk to humans, it remains low, as we had discussed in the previous article as well. And almost when it comes to milk samples in the US, interestingly, almost 20% of the US grocery milk samples, they have tested positive for the virus's genetic material. Although no live viruses have been detected, and that's why it makes us understand that how important things like pasteurization is. Because of pasteurization, we see that the viruses that have been found, they are dead and they are not going to cause any harm. Now, in case of India, we have seen that there have been reported cases of bird flu in the poultry across different states in India as well. And despite the kind of genetic adaptations that we have seen, the virus does not yet have the capability for human to human transmission, something that we had discussed in the last article, and that's why we see that it maintains a low immediate risk to the humans. But direct contact with the infected animals, this will heighten the risk, and that's why it is something that needs to be understood well, that why active global surveillance and data sharing to manage the and understand bird flu is very, very crucial. So that's why just remember some of the things, again a continuation of the last article itself. Then the next article, why is Boeing crewed space test significant? Now what we basically see is that the Boeing Starliner is set for a significant event, which is scheduled test flight on the 7th of May, when it is going to launch astronauts Barry Wilmore and Sunita Williams aboard. Now in this particular mission, this mission which has been conducted using Atlas V rocket, which with the help of an Atlas V rocket, we see that this is a mission that represents Starliner's third test, but the first time with human crew. And this is where they would target the International Space Station. It will be a test flight to the International Space Station. Now, the success in this endeavor would mark a very important milestone for the US, providing it with a second operational spacecraft for the astronaut deployment to the space. And this is something which has been developed by Boeing. This Starliner is a spacecraft which is intended for astronaut transport, and it is composed of a crew capsule for astronaut accommodation and a service module which is equipped with the life support systems and maneuvering capacities. So we know about this. We have learnt about these modules even in the context of our own Gaganyaan mission as well, that how these two modules will be carried out in the Gaganyaan mission also. Now the success of Starliner is very crucial, because for the US it restores their confidence and the advancing space capabilities, particularly when it comes to Boeing and SpaceX, which have started alternating missions to the International Space Station. And the upcoming mission will involve a total of 8 days stay at the International Space Station, and the crew capsule will then return to land in the New Mexico as a part of Boeing's ongoing effort to finalize their spacecraft's readiness for regular operational services as well. So that's why there are all these things that are being done. Now also remember that it becomes very, very crucial, because prior to this the US astronauts, they dependent on Russia's Soyuz for transport to the International Space Station, and that's why this is one of the ways in which they are completely getting away from any kind of requirement that they have from the side of Russia. Now coming to the last article for the day that we have under revisited headline, something that we have been discussing with regard to Israel-Palestine issue. Progress reported as ceasefire talks begin. Israel awaits Hamas response. Now what we basically have seen is that overall when it comes to the peace talks that have started, this is where we are right now. The talks which were aimed at ending the ongoing conflict in Gaza, they have resumed in Egypt on last Saturday. And this is where we see that there are mediators which are also involved, like Qatar is involved, Egypt is involved, and United States is involved. Alright. So we have Qatar, Egypt, and the US. Alright. Now these discussions, these are centered on a proposal that has been presented to Hamas, and this has suggested a 40-day cessation of the hostilities and exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Now while Hamas has engaged in talks, unfortunately Israel has delayed sending the delegation to Cairo. An Israeli official indicated that their participation hinges on seeing some kind of positive movement, that there should be some positive movement regarding the proposal agreement, and then only they will take a step. And we know that when it comes to the previous negotiation attempts, they have faltered, and this particularly has happened because of the disagreements that we have seen over a lasting ceasefire effort. So that's why we have to see that all this is coming, especially in the context of also the kind of military actions that we have seen from the side of Israel in Rafah especially. So we have to see how exactly it goes, and again, as I keep saying, that one should only hope that these go in a positive direction and it puts to a stop the ongoing conflict that right now has been devastating, especially for Palestine. Right, so with this we come to the end of today's session. Just remember that there is no mains question today because we did not have any article for detailed analysis. Largely these were all prelims based articles. Alright, so with that, let's end the session for today. Thank you very much for being here.